Welcome to a tale where love rises above battle scars. In battles of the heart, experience David's search for solace and Sarah's unwavering light. Let's the story begin. David stood at the edge of the worn-out bus station, his duffel bag hanging heavily by his side. His uniform, once a symbol of pride and duty, now felt like an ill-fitted skin. His gaze swept across the small town that hadn't changed much since his departure. The familiar was now strangely alien. Taking a deep breath, he began to walk his soldier's boots, crunching gravel beneath their weight. He felt eyes on him, heard the whispers of hero floating in the wind. But he felt far from one. He was a ghost haunted by echoes of gunfire and cries of fallen comrades. Seeking refuge in the familiar, he found himself walking into Maggie's Diner, the town's beloved eatery. The smell of coffee and freshly baked apple pie momentarily pushed away his haunting memories. There, amidst the quaint charm of the diner, he saw her Sarah. She sat by the window, her curly blonde hair falling on her face as she engrossed herself in a book. She looked up, and their eyes met a flicker of surprise, crossing her features before being replaced by a warm smile. She was a specter from a life he thought he'd left behind. "David," she said, her voice a soft melody that stirred emotions he'd long suppressed. "Welcome home." David felt a bittersweet pang in his chest. "Home," he repeated, looking around at the diner and the town outside the window, then back at Sarah. Suddenly, he wasn't so sure where that was anymore. Days turned into weeks. The familiarity of the small town began to wrap around David like an old blanket, comforting yet suffocating. But there was one familiarity he found himself being drawn to Sarah. Their encounters were no longer chance meetings. They were deliberate, yet unspoken agreements, taking solace in shared silence and long conversations. They would meet at the diner, sometimes at the park, sharing fragments of their lives. One day, as the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the park, David found himself opening up about his life as a soldier. He talked about the comrades he'd lost, the fear he'd felt, and the haunting scars the war had left on him. Sarah listened, her eyes filled with empathy, not pity. She shared her own sorrows, the pain of a failed marriage, the heartbreak of shattered dreams, and the struggle to rebuild her life. It felt natural, comfortable, their shared history providing a backdrop to their new bond. Their old affection rekindled like a slow-burning flame. Old jokes brought back. Shared laughter, shared secrets led to knowing glances, and the spaces between them started filling up with a familiar warmth. Their separate struggles seemed less daunting when faced together. They had found comfort in each other, a beacon of hope amidst their individual storms. The town was buzzing with excitement for the annual parade, a vibrant celebration of unity and shared history. David found himself amongst the crowd, Sarah by his side, her presence a comforting constant. The festive atmosphere was infectious, the laughter and cheer piercing through David's usual somber demeanor. But then came the marching band, the loud rhythm of the drums echoing the tumultuous heartbeat of a battlefield. The celebratory gunfire, meant to be a salute to heroes, sounded all too similar to the echoes of war he'd been trying to escape. His breath hitched, his heart pounded, and the world around him became a blur. David broke away from the crowd abruptly, leaving a concerned Sarah behind. He ran until the sounds were a distant hum and then collapsed under a tree, gasping for air, his body shaking from the intense flashback. The ghost of his past had once again caught up with him. Sarah found him a while later, his body still trembling slightly. "David," she whispered, reaching out to touch his shoulder. He flinched at her touch, his eyes reflecting a turmoil that Sarah could barely comprehend. The David she knew, the strong and resilient soldier, was shrouded by a shadow she didn't know how to dispel. She wanted to help him, to hold him, to tell him that it was okay. But David, wrapped in his own fears, pulled away. "I need to be alone, Sarah," he said, his voice strained. His words were like an icy barrier, pushing her away, isolating him in his trauma. Sarah was left watching as David disappeared, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than the fading sounds of the parade. Days passed, and David's isolation grew. He retreated further into himself, his peds looming like an insurmountable mountain between them. Sarah felt helpless, watching David struggle. She missed their shared laughter, their quiet moments. And above all, she missed the man who was slowly being consumed by his haunting past. Determined to not let David fight his battles alone, Sarah began to seek help. She read articles, spoke to therapists, and reached out to the local veteran support group. She was a whirlwind of determination, her love for David fueling her resolve. One day, she drove to David's place, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and resolve. She found him sitting on his porch, his eyes vacant as they stared into the distance. "David," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're not alone in this." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a myriad of emotions. "I can't drag you into this, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not your decision to make," she replied, her tone firm. "We can get help, David. There's a support group, therapies. You don't have to fight this alone." There was silence as David stared at her, his mind wrestling with her words. Finally, he nodded, a silent agreement to her proposition. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. What followed were weeks of struggle and healing, of painful revelations and shared victories. David started attending therapy sessions and the local veteran support group. It was not easy, and there were days when the darkness seemed to overpower him, but he fought on, each day a little step towards recovery. Sarah was with him every step of the way, her unwavering support his pillar of strength. She was there during the therapy sessions, during the quiet nights when the nightmares came, and during the small victories when David could finally sleep a night without waking up in fear. Their relationship had evolved, no longer just a romantic bond, but a partnership, a united front against their shared adversary. Their love grew, not despite the struggles, but because of them, each shared hardship, strengthening their bond. The months passed, and the town that once buzzed with the annual parade was now quiet, basking in the tranquility of early fall. David and Sarah sat in the park, the setting sun casting long shadows around them. The silence between them was comfortable. The scars of the past, no longer a source of pain, but reminders of a battle fought and won. David turned to Sarah, his eyes reflecting a quiet strength. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice sincere. Sarah looked at him, her heart filled with love for this man who had fought his demons and emerged stronger. "For what?" she asked, her voice soft. "For coming back into my life, for standing by me, for making me believe in love again," he said, his words echoing the promise of a future they were ready to face together. As they watched the sun set on the horizon, a sense of peace settled over them. Their journey had been long and filled with struggle, but they had emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held together.